Hello there, kia ora. When I say the words moral outrage, chances are you think of something like this,
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
which isn't inaccurate, but it's actually about halfway through what we call the Moral Outrage Media Theory cycle, which is a 5-step cycle that's used to create outrage and change the way that people think and feel about things. And well, to be honest, it's something that our Prime Minister should probably be really concerned with because his two political partners, they're really, really good at it. In fact, they're so good at it that they're now currently controlling the mainstream media's conversations and narratives around things like how Māori are being treated by this government or the treaty's principles bill. And that should be a real concern for someone who's supposed to be in charge of the government. Now, you see, the way that moral outrage theory works ties in really closely to the muted group syndrome theory that I pointed out, as well as rage farming. Essentially, it's someone or something is identified as a threat to values or interests. And if we were to use something like Māoridom as an example here, we can go back to, say, the Taxpayer Union and the ACT Party deciding that co-governance was very much a threat to the values or interests of their very rich white donors. And that is a real concern for the general public. But what's more of a concern for those particular parties and organisations is how Māoridom is perceived as a threat or not. And so they need to work on that really specifically. By using something like co-governance, they can turn around and say this is a threat to the values of what makes this country what it is. That threat then gets depicted in easily recognisable forms by the media. So it will be something like a, short, sharp tweet from somebody who thinks King Charles III is tops, but doesn't really understand the idea of hereditary Māori land rights. Those kind of things tend to show up quite a bit, but the idea of it being homogenised by media, both mainstream and social, leads into a rapid rise of public concern. And we saw that happen really specifically when the Taxpayers Union decided to do a Stop Co-Governance tour around the country, teaming up with wonderful people like Voices for Freedom organisers. But this tends to lead to a response from authorities and opinion makers. The response in this case is David Seymour, for example, wanting to make sure that there is a conversation around Te Tiriti and its principles. But he knows full well that the stance he's taking and the way he's putting it out there creates more outrage, which creates more conversation, which leads him to being in charge of what that particular conversation is in mainstream media. It's who the media are going to go to first to find out what's going on. The same sort of thing as what New Zealand First does, and a lot of their cultural war policies that they put into their coalition agreement is very much about creating that moral panic and trying to do something to say, look, we're dealing with it. You see, the 5th step in this whole thing is basically the panic receding or some sort of societal change. The panic isn't going to be receding, though, for certain groups if they don't feel like they're being heard. For example, those people that get really upset about the idea of RSE in schools, they're not going to recede their moral panic about what's going on, even though this is something that's been going on for well over a decade and has really good results because, well, won't somebody please think of the children? So when it comes to the way that this controls narratives, we see that happen firsthand really specifically around the treaty conversation that David Seymour wants to have, even though 99% of the country will tell you that this is a contentious issue, at bare minimum, no matter where they stand on the spectrum of their view of this. But that there is all about building moral outrage, which means that more people can talk about it, which means more people are exposed to his ideas and his philosophies and his beliefs, and therefore more people will probably come around to his way of thinking at some stage. Moral outrage theory posits that the only way that you can actually stop this sort of thing from happening is to turn off the TV.